clock on the wall says it is 5:30. We're going to do the real thing. I am Dr. Kaylea Champion. I am a professor of computer science at UW-Bothell. And here to tell you, because it's a new job I'm starting in the fall. Yeah. That's why I got the chair. So I'm going to give you some ideas here from my ongoing research project about generative AI and open source cybersecurity. I call it Invasion of the Plausible Slop. I'm gonna stand like over here and move the mic. All right, this is my advanced move. All right, so yes, I study how open source works and how to make it better, including the risks we face and the ways we can prevail. But I'm not alone in this endeavor. I'm actually part of a lab where folks from University of Texas, Austin, Purdue, Northwestern, as well as UW, all participate. This is from one of our recent meetups, studying all kinds of different phenomena in online communities, thinking about collective action problems, including but not exclusively open source. So we know that the key technologies behind generative AI are open source. So we're talking infrastructure, orchestration tools, programming languages, training data, all this great stuff. We got your PyTorch, scikit-learn, my personal favorite, Hugging Face, which is beautiful, GitHub, Copilot, Wikipedia itself, all these things. So generative AI is built on open source for the better, right? For the better, right? Like that's the meme. That's the joke. So not all of the impacts of generative AI have been positive for the open source world. The benefits and revenues of generative AI have not all flowed exclusively into open source pockets. In fact, we're seeing some negative impacts. So here's a few selections here that I've collected, posts sort of describing in particular this question of AI slop and what to do about it. A lot of the online discussion about this has been led by Daniel Stenberg from curl. He's kind of really jumped out there because he's seeing the problem most extensively in curl. And I feel like curl is one of these infrastructure technologies that if something is causing curl to suffer, like I care. Like this bothers me because curl is the thing that I just trust to work. Copy, paste, done. So if curl is concerned, I'm concerned. And what he's done is collected actually a whole gist of slop bug reports. These are published up on GitHub, things that have come in to his bug bounty program that qualify as AI slop. And I really admire the sort of the data collection and building up a data set that this represents. And it makes things for me as a researcher a little bit easier because it gives me a head start on trying to get that data set together. All right, so what is my data? What am I speaking from? This is a collection of about 40 different posts, social media, blog posts, and so on, where I've kind of captured them. And I've got journalistic articles, sort of the register, kind of the IT or technology press, from kind of the more sort of big names to some of the more kind of focused publications, as well as social media platforms. So posts go up on LinkedIn or on places like Slashdot and Hacker News. I can capture all of that and then treat those things as data to analyze, as well as things like HackerOne and GitHub that put that data out there and make it public. So this kind of document list that I've developed to understand the problem of AI slop bug reports came from initially sort of observation. I was kind of vamping before the talk started saying, oh yeah, I tried to avoid AI as a researcher for a long time. But when I started seeing complaints coming in from folks saying, hey, we're suffering from this problem, I felt like, okay, this is something where I can make a difference. My role in the open source community is that I do research about open source. So this is an opportunity for me. My approach then, having gathered all of these perspectives together and collected this sort of archive of documents, is to use thematic analysis. So this is a qualitative method. I'm doing a mixed method series of studies, but I'm starting with qualitative work, which means I'm able to really dig into and understand what's going on in a sort of less sort of, I guess, numeric kind of way, like actually trying to build insight into what's happening, analyzing what people are saying. So how it works is that I tag data with sort of statements with semantic codes that interpret sort of what's the meaning of this, what's going on. I'm going to read really deeply, try to dig out that meaning, and then organize it in some way. So we can group and regroup those codes, which are sort of text strings essentially, into themes, try to make sense of things, and then say, all right, so now I've got all of this gathered together. How are these ideas connected to each other? And that's where you describe the themes that you see. So the results from some of that work is what I'll be talking about today. All right, so that means we start from things like this blog post from Seth Larson, who works for the Python Software Foundation, and it turns it into something that looks much harder to read, but this is actually how we analyze stuff when we use a qualitative data analysis system. So I'm able to highlight through and mark codes and so on, and so I'm then summarizing down the arguments being made into these codes. All right. So what even is this plausible slop that I'm talking about? How am I defining it? I have a kind of 5-trait definition I'm working from. So first, this is high volume, or at least higher volume than what people want to see, unwanted material. It's fairly cheap to produce. We know we can just throw things into a generative AI chatbot and prompt it in some way, and it spits it back to us. So it's basically free in a lot of ways, well, free to us as consumers. It's been generated by AI. That's a sort of definitional piece here. And because it's AI generated, that means the text is somewhat context sensitive. It's probabilistic. It's not simply sort of an algorithm, turn the crank and get the same thing every time. Instead, you get some varying responses depending on not only the prompt, but also on random seeds and so on. Another trait of plausible slop is that it's difficult to validate and assess, but ultimately fabricated. So if it was great, if it was excellent material that we wanted to use, we wouldn't call it slop. It would be great. That's a result from this system or this tool that I desire to use. But if it's plausible slop, we want something that's unwanted, essentially, as a trait there. And then finally, the impact of plausible slop is that it attacks both social and technical structures, and I'll unpack what I mean by that a little bit later in the presentation. And I want to distinguish it from other kinds of online attacks or cybersecurity questions by implicating this social and technical factors. All right. So just how bad is it, this sort of scenario that I'm sketching out here? It's a very good question. Is bad enough, as I said, for maintainers of projects we care about to raise it? I see it as a strain to an already strained system. We get together at these open source conferences and we say maintainers are burned out. It's hard to onboard newcomers. We have a list of things we're concerned about, and now there's a new one on the pile, and we really didn't need a new thing on the pile. We learned from the XZ vulnerability that attacks that sort of target that maintainer capacity can cause damage. And we know, because this is a system based on technology in general, that any kind of automation is going to allow for faster iteration and mutation and so on. So there's the sort of the strain that can come in. I'm also seeing from the reports that are coming in that these attacks are already quite sophisticated, and it's pretty early days into this sort of problem. So my favorite example, or sort of anti-favorite example of this, one of the bugs that Stenberg has cataloged, someone included output from testing tools. You know, a Valgrind will say this and this and such, and then you'll get this and such stack trace, and then this sort of sketching out that whole scenario in a very sort of strongly argued and well-formatted way, the same way it looks from when it comes from our tools, but the stack traces themselves were fabricated. So the tool, actually, the generative AI chatbot actually fabricated the stack trace. And I feel like fabricated evidence is sort of a new high, new low of what the plausibility of these reports. You know, we're not just talking about counting the number of R's in strawberry, or somebody says to add 2 and 2 and get 5, or we immediately know, like, oh yeah, that's not correct. Instead, like, it takes a real person, real time, to sort of sniff through the traces, you know, maybe hours of sleuthing until they're like, oh, you know, crap, somebody just copy pasted a prompt in 5 minutes and just wasted a bunch of my time. All right. So if we detect these issues, if we spend a few hours and we're like, okay, fine, this is not real, this is not something to act on, it's drawn time away from real security issues, which we didn't need that either. If it's not detected, well, then we have another set of problems around waste, fraud, abuse, malware, etc. Anything that slips in past all of our detection mechanisms has a whole category of problems that it can cause. And the other piece, I guess, when we talk about the sort of risk here is just to ask, how bad does it have to be a problem? So this is kind of the classic XKCD cartoon. Every time I give a presentation, someone asks me if I've seen this cartoon. So I just include it in every talk that I give. So the picture here, you've got all these blocks stacked. If you haven't enjoyed this one before, the top says all modern digital infrastructure sort of stacked up in various ways. And then there's this bottom piece, the Nebraska guy problem. It's the project some random person in Nebraska. Why Nebraska? Anyway, Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. And so we sort of can imagine what happens Jenga style if we pull out that block, everything falls down, all fall down. So again, this is my argument that regardless of how many of these kinds of bug reports we're seeing, it doesn't have to be a lot to be pretty bad. All right. So what is the threat model that I'm working from? And then now, having kind of described a story, good story, what's the measurement strategy around that story? Let's talk a little bit about a sort of more concrete threat model. So we have slop drowning out real problems. We have waste, fraud, and abuse. And then we have a somewhat harder to quantify issue here around social structures under strain. So we have a number of sort of related factors here. One would be if you feel like a report that has come in is AI and you say it's AI and it's not. No one likes to be treated like they're AI. It can be very discouraging to be told that you're a bot when you aren't. We've seen this in Wikipedia, that when people were treated in a sort of automated fashion, that they stopped contributing and stopped coming back. So we know that this is a problem. And so this can lead to sort of situations where maybe we're using AI in places we used to have genuine interactions. This gets called dead internet theory, where you sign into a subreddit where there used to be wonderful discussions, and suddenly everyone is just sort of copy pasting out of a chatbot, and you no longer feel like you have a community around you. So both of these can contribute then to breakdowns in pathways of newcomers joining, which is a classic problem that we have in open source, and also leading to, again, burnout for contributors and leaders, another problem we already had. The worst case scenario with all of these factors now going on at once is what I would call social model collapse, where we have a model for how we get things done, but because we've weakened in several places, maybe all at the same time by an onslaught of sort of new technology, we have a potential for collapse. So what is the social model that I'm talking about? How do we think of this? In at least a research perspective, we talk about an onion model. This also, I think, gets used somewhat within community settings. The onion model, though, doesn't look exactly like an onion. When I tried to draw it, I couldn't even make myself draw it like an onion, because we know there's a much bigger pool on the outside of kind of casual contributors, that outer layer of the onion, and then we have this thought that will bring them sort of toward the core of the onion over time, become trusted contributors, core contributors, and maintainers. So this is certainly not drawn to scale, but we can imagine people sort of moving through these sort of layers to become that core of maintainers that we hope for. Another way we might model these social interactions is to think about a long tail model. So people talk about the 80-20 rule. It maybe feels a little bit more like the 99.5 to a half rule, where we have kind of this core work from a smaller group and then unique work coming in from an expanded group kind of out into that long tail. My social model for open source looks a lot more like a hydrographic map. I see sort of watersheds and people connecting to people. It's much more complicated to me and more interconnected than either of those social models would suggest. Plus, it's prettier this way. So this is a hydrographic map of Germany. All right. So I had my definition of plausible slop that I presented. This is sort of the definition I'm working from. And when I was sort of doing my qualitative analysis of how the open source community is grappling with this problem, how we're talking about it, what we're doing, people are like, oh, it's like spam. So if it's like spam, then we solve it like spam, right? So, okay, higher volume, unwanted messages, great, sounds good. Cheap to produce, also like spam. But spam is generally more sort of procedurally generated rather than this more context-generated material that we see with AI. It's also, at least at this point, relatively easy to detect. We have models for it. It used to be harder. It's much easier now. It attacks maybe some social structures, but certainly technical structures. It's the flood of material into the servers that's the biggest concern. So maybe a little bit of a mismatch in terms of this particular analogy. Other folks say, oh, well, SLOP is like a denial of service attack. Okay, so let's test that particular model against the definition we have so far. High volume, unwanted messages, check, we got that one. Cheap to produce, yeah, pretty much. Procedurally generated, though, you've got, your workers on your machines that have been hacked into, and so they're generating all this traffic. It's not all that clever. And sort of easy to detect in that, your traffic goes like this, and then your servers fall off the internet. It's sort of an obvious, essentially. If you're under a denial of service attack, you're flooded in ways that show sort of right immediately on the graph. And tends to attack technical structures unless you're the person who has to get up in the middle of the night to solve the problem and reboot the server, in which case it's maybe a little more social. But by and large, I think a denial of service attack, also like spam, is sort of a little bit of a mismatch to what we're seeing with Plausible Slop. So maybe Slop is more like spear phishing. Although the low volume messages versus higher volume messages, that's not a match. Spear phishing, more challenging to produce. You imagine with spear phishing, somebody's gotten a lot of information about a company and sort of customized their attack toward one very specific environment. So maybe that's not as good of a match. But it is more custom generated, the place where our other analogies were falling down. It is often hard to detect. That's why it can be pretty successful. And spear phishing does attack both social and technical structures. So that means we have sort of a table here of like matches where here I have like those 5 traits for my definition, and in green we see that spam and the denial of service attack, map pretty well into some of these traits, but not others, and that we have kind of a reverse relationship for spear phishing where it doesn't map here, but it maps pretty well over there. So the analogies and therefore the tools and responses, there's a little bit of a mismatch here, but we draw some maybe from what we learned from spam and denial of service attacks and draw some from what we've learned about spear phishing. We can start to think about what a response might look like. Another piece that comes up a lot when we talk about Plausible Slop is everyone wants to know, why are people doing this? Why on earth would someone send in a terrible false bug report to the maintainers of curl? That sounds cruel and wrong. Why would they do that? Because maybe these are well-intended newcomers. They want to help. They want to be part of things. They know curl is important, and we want to think about how we might welcome them on board. So is SLOP like an eternal September where lots of people are sort of trying to join us? This analogy draws back to the dawn of the internet, when it used to be once upon a time that college kids would get their first access to the internet and show up then in September and flood the rest of the internet with their sort of newbie-style traffic, and then they would sort of get acculturated, and then another September would come around. And then AOL came along, and September became eternal, and constantly newcomers coming, and we had to figure out, how do we bring new folks onto the internet? So is SLOP going to be like that, where everyone gets a new tool, and they're like, oh, well, maybe I can do open sourcey stuff by using AI, and I could follow all the rules and get involved? We might know how to respond if it's newcomers and an eternal September phenomenon. We might have a strategy there, because those are folks who we can socialize into the community. We can teach them. They might be discouraged if we treat them with hostility, but investing in them is an investment in project sustainability that might pay off for us. If those newcomers are actually the people authoring the SLOP, which I think is somewhat doubtful, we could ask ourselves, okay, maybe they're just reward seekers. Maybe there's a reason that they're flocking to bug bounty platforms at a much higher rate than they seem to be flocking to GitHub to sort of commit these acts of slop. They're seeking bounties, they're seeking glory, they want those sweet CVE numbers on their resumes so they can get a job. If that's the case, if that's who's attacking us, then they're likely to respond to very consistent sort of approaches toward rules. If we validate what's coming in, then they're trying to just seek those extrinsic rewards. We can respond to their reward sort of proportionally. We might need to be a little bit less concerned about incorporating them socially and sort of making them feel part of the community, because that's maybe not their goal. Also, folks seeking those external rewards, they might get better at using AI overall. They're trying to level up their game overall. So the third scenario we might think about is, maybe these are just attackers. Maybe these are just another way that the bad guys are trying to get in. They're just playing the odds. They're throwing a prompt and a couple of targets into the chatbot, and they're getting back whatever they get, throwing it out there. So they may mutate over time to improve that strategy to get better at their attack. And finally, if we can't adjust to the volume that we're getting, does it even matter why they're doing it? Like, if we can't respond appropriately, regardless of why they're doing it, it's still a flood. It's still too many for people to handle, right? So we face a dilemma. Our current approaches, I would argue, are insufficient. And my take is that governance is also likely to be insufficient, because slop is well formatted and follows the rules. Except for the rule about telling the truth, it follows all the other rules. Also, my concern is this sort of ad hoc approach that folks are often taking now, like, oh yeah, I know it when I see it, and we know a lot of it when we see it right now, right? But I think that won't scale. I think that's going to be insufficient. It's not just about the M-dash. Recall the now dated advice. We used to say, oh yeah, you'll never get phished, you'll never fall for scams, because those attackers use bad grammar and have very mismatched weird information. Well, guess what? Thanks to generative AI, thank you, scammers can now have excellent grammar and correct contextual information. So we can't just say, oh yeah, it's going to look bad, weird, etc., and that'll be our tell for AI. So it's going to probably not be reasonable to interpret that kind of fluidity of language as a kind of safety from these reports. Another element to this dilemma that I think we face is that as newcomers are seeking to get better, they may follow our rules more closely and start to look more like AI, using AI to improve their language and clean things up. Now the people we want are looking less and less like the people we want. This is sort of dilemmas all the way down. Meanwhile, all the model tells that get kind of published on dead LinkedIn or what have you are sort of being ironed away pretty rapidly. So as soon as someone complains about, oh yeah, I got a goofy response from this LLM, well, you got to believe that then all the folks who are designing and building those models are creating rules against that kind of behavior to prevent it. So those tells are sort of being removed. And further, we have this other element of the dilemma that fraudsters and attackers also likewise are getting better and smarter. So they, as they get better at writing those engineered prompts, are going to look less and less like AI over time because of they improving that prompt engineering. So there's no sort of silver bullet or easy way out here, but we should definitely ask how to respond. So I think we need to draw from both that trusted arsenal, that history of approaches that we've built up, as well as build some new strategies. And this is an active area of work for me. I've described what I've found so far from qualitative work. This is my analysis of the problem to date, and I'm drawing heavily from community observations of the problem kind of in the wild. So the things I've seen folks doing kind of out there include offering a lot of support and encouragement for maintainers. We're doing this super well. So you read, so folks post that this is happening. Everyone says, I hate that that's happening to you. How can we help? We want to be involved. There's a lot of social support immediately coming to maintainers. This is a very good thing. Our community is much stronger, I think, now than it was 5-10 years ago. Also, what I see in action against this are a series of rules and governance maneuvers. I see folks putting AI disclosure requirements in place, and I see folks putting out just sort of out and out AI bans. I see work around education and awareness. However, to go beyond that and to sort of block things further or sort of improve the response further, there's a lot of kind of dialectical oppositions in the solutions people are proposing to kind of take that next step. What do we do next? This is sort of my oppositions, the dialectical oppositions that I've observed so far. So we have some folks who are saying, you know what, don't bring slop to a slop fight. You know, I get that. AI is costly in terms of environmental cost. There's a lot of concerns about the way that it handles copyright, the way that it respects people's licenses, and we don't see the real cost because of the role of VC capital. And then there's a set of arguments that say, no, you got to use AI to stop AI. So that's some opposition that I think we have in our community right now. There's folks who are sort of pushing toward, like, let's blame the tool, not the user. And then we have people, blame the user, not the tool. So there again, I think there's some opposition within the community that we need to think through and kind of navigate. We see people pointing to that need for automation, just get rid of it, stop it, put an end. And then folks who are more on the, we need to educate, we need to sort of convince people to quit. There's some opposition too around how we respond to platforms. Should we stop doing things? Should we move off of platforms that don't protect us from these kinds of attacks? Or should we work with platform maintainers to try to improve those platforms? One of the comments here that came in from Curl is that although their bug bounty program has been very successful for them, they're thinking about stepping away from that program altogether because it's just too much of a flood. It's too costly. It's been working, it's been great, and they're ready to quit. So that's a place that they're considering withdrawing entirely from that particular strategy. I see opposition too between where folks are calling for more collective strategies versus sort of a very per project, let's think about how to resolve it, just within our space. And I see people who are proposing sort of more alternate paradigms around financial bonding for bug bounty programs. I hear people talking about trust webs. Maybe this is a place where crypto can solve everything. So there's people promoting those alternate paradigms. And then there's folks who are saying, you know what, let's just improve the way we do things currently. Let's just get faster at detecting. Let's raise the barriers to submission, like require reproducible example. Or let's seek regulation. Let's ask for help on this. So these are the sort of dialectically opposed sort of positions that I see people taking. All right, so this is definitely work in progress. I am somewhere on a road, probably not quite as lovely as this road, and I'm continuing this cataloging that I've described, trying to shift gears toward quantitative work, measuring impacts of both slop and the countermeasures people take to the slop, prototyping responses and possibilities, and the responses that I'm thinking about and hoping to sort of beta test or the ideas with all of you, alpha, pre-alpha. So I'm trying to collect people's governance responses, who's making what policy moves, does it work, does it help? And then I think I want to build some models to support automated approaches. So what do we need to include in a model that helps maintainers do this work? We need to use a tool chain that's consistent with software freedom. So that means open source, open data, open models, open weights, open. At least some communities would not accept anything less, so I wouldn't either. And I think we need to use as small as possible language models to consider those environmental costs. Those are lightweight to train and run. That means we can embed them everywhere rather than having to make lots of external costly calls outside. Oops. I think that we need to think both collectively and locally here. We shouldn't do one in opposition to the other. So we want collectively available solutions that can be locally tuned and try to strike the right balance between custom and shared. I also think there's opportunities here to go beyond AI detection and think about validation tools. So when slop bug reports come in, they can be validated externally of the humans that are spending the time to do that. And so pulling out tools that can do that validation not only helps stop slop, but helps with all kinds of bug responses in general, which I think means that we're not just sort of trying to get back to zero, but maybe improving things overall. All right. So now I'm hoping we have a few minutes, just a few minutes, to talk a little bit about what you think. Everyone has their own AI story, and I've told you a lot of my own stories. Are you seeing slop in your parts of floss? How plausible is the slop that you're seeing? What kinds of traits would you then look for in a solution to this? And do you have any other questions and feedback? All right, thank you. All right, I think I saw a hand go up. Who has questions or thoughts or comments or shout outs?
Over there.
Over there, we'll start with you.
We had a big problem with this.
What project, if you don't mind saying?
It's a local phone network.
Oh, uh-huh.
So we had a problem. I think one person launched hundreds of bots at us, tried to overwhelm us. It seemed that the community takeover was happening. It's just one person. We developed a series of ways the bots would find something that looks real, that they engage with, but it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
Then we could use that, what's the name we call that? Basically a landmine. Then we could ban that person each time. Automatically, just scripted.
Yeah, I think those, I'm too close to the mic. They pumped the gain up, I think, because I was wandering around. Yeah, I think that some mix of like, so if you have to ban that person and then everyone else has to ban that person, we're sort of back in the spam days, right? That used to be how we responded to spam. And then we sort of graduated up to real-time blacklisting. And so that's where a individual response versus a collective response might sort of come into play, right? It's like, if we're all getting terrible, slop bug reports from the same person or the same identity, maybe we should share that information collectively in some way. Awesome. Yeah.
You said more people are putting in like AI disclosure requirements. What do you typically see in those requirements? What would you suggest including those?
So what I've seen is essentially people say, we know that people have good, like legitimate uses for AI around like improving their language usage and so on, and translation especially. It's a way to make things available. So if you're using AI, tell us. And that's really as complex as those governance responses are. They're just like, if you've used AI, tell us so. Check this box, yes or no, that level. And the thought I think there is that then even if it triggers my own personal, like that's an AI response, like my personal heuristic, then I have a way to sort of excuse it, like, oh, well, but they're telling me about it, they're explaining what they did. I can forgive some of it because I know that it's well-intentioned. Unfortunately, I think that so far, a lot of these reports are still coming in without that disclosure. It's a very social request, right, from assumption of good faith, and that doesn't seem to be 100%. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
I was going to ask that you just talk more about the validation that you were talking about on the very last slide.
Yeah. So
What does that look like? Yeah.
So the particular piece around validation I'm thinking here is that right now maintainers go through a really exhaustive process when they get a bug or security report to figure out, is it legitimate? What's the scope of it? What's really going on? And it's a very manual and I guess sort of search heavy process where you're pulling from a lot of sort of stored knowledge. These are expert folks, and that's a very asymmetric ask. So you have a very sort of basic amount of effort that goes in, and then it's asymmetric to the validation effort that goes in response. So the validation, I think, is it's per bug, it's per situation, and it's based on this expertise of the individual. Is it specific to this build of the kernel, this version of this operating system? All this hardware. Somebody is spending actually a lot of time trying to trace through the scenario, and these slop bug reports come with pretty sophisticated scenarios describing this and how to reproduce it in their own context and what happened. I did this and I did this and so on. But unfortunately, even those details turn out to be false. Right. Yeah.
OWASP has recently come out with a top 10 security issues related to LLMs. Does this fit in one of those 10 categories, or is this something that it looks like that needs to be added to that?
Possibly. I don't know actually about the OWASP list that you've described. I would love to find out if this is part of their scope.
Security protocol. I mean, it's no open source community that.
Yeah, I will look and see. On the sort of research side, a lot of the research about cybersecurity and LLMs is very oriented around an exotic version of what AI can do for cybersecurity, like hyper intelligent robots crawling through your network and like breaking through your firewalls. It's very science fiction, the envisioning of what kinds of attacks might be possible. And we should think about those things too. But this is pretty mundane. Like, this is somebody just getting lied to by a tool that we know lies about things. So I feel like sometimes those less exotic style attacks are just as powerful, if not more so, than the sort of things that we might imagine only in sort of our darkest dreams. New caller, yeah.
No, thank you for your talk. I found it really compelling. You mentioned Wikipedia at one point and people doing these kinds of things on there. And
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to see, what kinds of approaches can also work in other kinds of online communities, because I think, for several reasons, the challenges that people are facing in these open source projects are just a bit different. Maybe it's perhaps easier, to generate AI slop for a Wikipedia top page, but until maybe relatively recently, you weren't getting these fake stack traces, as you mentioned.
The sort of fabrication of evidence piece. Yeah, I think that, so I've looked at the Wikipedia case quite a bit too, because I care a lot about Wikipedia as well. I think that there's a shared problem between open source and Wikipedia, because so much of the data for these models is trained on, what do we train our models on? We train it on open source and we train it on Wikipedia. And we train it on, say, archive, wherever we can get sort of massive amounts of text and just sort of slurp it up. So that means that models are particularly good at acting like whatever it is they're trained upon, which means it's quite well tuned to fake open source related material and can fake also Wikipedia material. Where Wikipedia has an advantage over open source, I think, is that one fabricated reference in a Wikipedia article submission can sort of tell you that the whole thing is sort of garbage. Whereas if you're trying to validate a bug, it's like, oh, well, is it me? Like, I just didn't follow the steps right? Or, are the conditions just not quite correct? You can get pretty far into the rabbit hole before you're like, dang, this whole thing is like built on lies, versus Wikipedia, where we can just kind of bail as soon as we see a fake reference. Yeah.
I am thinking about the small contingent of well-intentioned people. Like, I'm not saying that, I'm not asking this question as I'm like, oh, this will solve everything, but I am thinking about like the way that we can nurture the incoming generation of open source contributors, and think about like what sort of social and cultural precedent we can set around best practices. And like, I've heard like enough, like some talk of like AI shaming. Like, if you're generating slop, you should like feel bad about it, and we can like have social pressure. And I'm curious and I think that an outcome of this is like someone who's very well intentioned might ask generative AI to file this bug report for me, and they think that is their stack trace.
Mhm.
Like, it's not malicious, but they're like, oh, well, it's there, and now I'm a, like, more efficient, like, freshman CS student because I, like, contributed to this. Like, they think that, like, this is how you're supposed to use tools because there's so much media around, like, this is what it looks like to be a developer now. And I'm wondering, because I know that you work, like, within the education space, like, can we have, like, can we counter this narrative and, like, have these sorts of ideas around best practices and ethical use of these things or non-use?
Yeah, I think that you're touching on several, I think, pieces of ways to respond to this. One of those is absolutely there's a lot of hype, and people can easily believe that what they're doing is actually good. And so I think the education aspect to that, and it's a general public thing as well as in a school setting, is to just help people understand what these models are, how they work, what they're trained on, what they can really do. And as we keep raising these issues, that we can hope that model builders also will respond and improve their models, not only to not fabricate information, but also express their uncertainty where they have uncertainty. I feel like learning to live with uncertainty is a place that society needs to go, and we need to understand how to measure and understand uncertainty. So those are the sort of avenues that I see. But it starts, I think, with sort of starting to sort of pop the bubble around the hype that people have around AI. And I think we're not there yet, but we've been through this cycle at least twice before, where you have this kind of AI hype cycle every 20-ish years or so. So we were really due for this piece of the hype cycle. And usually after an AI summer, there's an AI winter. But what alternates with AI summer and AI winter is HCI summer and HCI winter, which HCI is human computer interaction. And what that is a bunch of folks with a sort of more social perspective on technology trying to say, okay, so great discoveries, CS folks, let's turn it into something that actually makes life better for humans. So that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that winter is coming, and that with it comes a sort of a trend toward humanizing these things in ways that actually make people's lives better. Because I can use these tools in ways that make my life better, and I would like to see that out more broadly. So, thanks. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when you said this is a tool that like lies to you because like with Wikipedia, I know that there was a case a while back where someone submitted a bunch of like false translations into like I think it was Scots, so it was like
Oh yeah. That was it.
To verify it, and you know no one was really prepared for that eventuality of someone just lying, and so I'm a little concerned of just sort of like maybe there's not a great solution because people aren't good at handling someone just lying to you and don't know how to detect it and deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a social question, right? It's a societal question. How do we move forward with that? I mean, I think Wikipedia, as an example, you can point to all the ways that it doesn't work, but it's also better than essentially everything else we've tried. So it's full of flaws, and yet it manages to be one of the best places on the internet. So that's an interesting dichotomy to live with, but that's I think where we are. Awesome. What rock stars you all are on a Saturday evening. Thank you so much.
And to abuse one more second, I want to take a second to thank Kaylea for all your tireless monitoring.